what PPPs are and how they affect your life? Hi, my name is Sue Godt. I've had the privilege of living and working across Africa for most of my adult life, and I've seen the devastating impact of this type of development. I'm very proud to be working with Dawn to bring these stories to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Corina Rodríguez Enríquez. I am part of the executive committee of DAWN, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. DAWN is a lead organization in development studies from a feminist perspective, and we have increasingly challenged the mainstream narrative and practice that locates and promotes the private sector as the key actor, and that leads to a marketization of development. To expose this corporate capture of development, we have carried out a set of case studies that focuses on experiences of public-private partnerships, or as we call them, PPPs. We wanted to generate clear evidence about how the discourse promoting advantages of PPPs is built at the country level and how legal frameworks are framed to allow them. We also wanted to strengthen the evidence about the implication of using PPP modalities when providing social goods and services, about their impact on inequality gaps, and about whether there is resistances to this type of development model. Today, we are joined by Sue Godt, and we are learning about experiences in Sierra Leone. We are very happy to have with us Hussainatu Abdullah, who was the author of this case study. Hussainatu is an independent researcher with research and consultancy experiences in Eritrea, Nigeria, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. She has provided consultancy services to the African Development Bank, African Union, and the Millennium Challenge Corporation. She holds a PhD in sociology and social anthropology from the University of Hull.
Thank you very much, Corina.
Before starting to discuss PPPs in Sierra Leone, we would really love to learn about your own trajectory as a feminist. What brought you into feminism?
I got into feminism in 1982 as an undergraduate student at the Ahmadu Bello University. At that time, a group of feminist scholars were just emerging in Nigeria, and they were to organize the first Women in Nigeria conference. And I was asked by one of my professors to register participants at the meeting. I knew a bit about Marxist theory and women's empowerment within the Marxist framework. So I listened. At the end of the meeting, I took books from the professor that asked me to register participants. After that, I ensured that all my elective courses were focused on political sociology and development studies.
That's wonderful, Hussainatu. A long time ago, and you are still researching from that focus. I believe feminism is a place where we come in and never go out. Sierra Leone, the country on which you authored the case, is regularly portrayed as a fragile and conflict-affected state, dealing with the aftermath of the devastating civil war from 1991 to 2002, and also the 2014 Ebola virus disease outbreak. The response by the government of Sierra Leone, strongly supported by international financial institutions, including the World Bank, the IMF, the African Development Bank, and numerous funders, and then reinforced by the dominant narrative, suggests that the only solution to the country's problem is through facilitating blended financing and catalyzing private sectoral financial resources and leadership. This is then Sierra Leone's approach to achieving the so-called Africa Rising vision. Is this really how the narrative is perceived nationally? Is there anything specific on this national case from your point of view?
Nationally, well, with some of the national elites, that's what they see as the way forward. But I want to say that they didn't even give Sierra Leone time after the civil war to even move from humanitarian assistance to long-term development. And they brought the PPP model. Although it was not concretized until 2013, they started with different structures that the World Bank was paying for as the bedrock to a full-blown PPP. But people have been complaining. Researchers have written a lot against privatization especially in the agricultural sector. People have been complaining about what is happening. So there's this alternative view that is developing and challenging the dominant view of the state. People are questioning it from the perspective of NGOs, from academics, and just ordinary citizens, because when they've privatized things and they've privatized facilities and you still cannot get good services, people are asking, why am I paying so much and not getting the services as it should be?
And as you say, there are indications that the model isn't achieving the expected results. I know we've heard about these recent demonstrations and the unrest in Freetown that really point to growing marginalization and inequities as people protested the rising cost of living. We've also been hearing about the impact of COVID and especially the international loans and the growing level of indebtedness. And I've seen that Sierra Leone is listed as one of the world's 36 heavily indebted poor countries. So I guess it would be interesting to hear your reflections on whether there's any connection between the PPP strategy and the social protest. And overall, what are your reflections on this PPP model for addressing Sierra Leone's problems and for advancing peace and economic development of the country?
There is a link between the protest and the PPP model of development, because people are just fed up. You're paying for services and the services are irregular, of poor quality. So what do? 70% of the youth, that is age 15 to 35 years, are unemployed. They see how their parents are suffering. Some of them are educated with university degrees and they don't have a job. So all that and the COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war just brought all the pent-up feelings to the fore, and people just felt they should protest and make their voices heard.
I think it really shows the contradictions between the policy and the reality. And how would you assess the state's ability to maneuver around or fundamentally change this PPP and neoliberal strategy, especially after it's invested so much into it and been supported to do that?
Very good question. My assessment is dim. The state in Sierra Leone, or the political parties, we don't have parties that are strictly divided along ideological lines, conservative, right-wing, and progressive parties. You don't have two people on the left and NGOs. They just sit and explain and engage the state to see how they can maneuver to get things done. So that is one major problem. It is so embedded. When the new government came in 2018, they complained about Addax. They voted against the motion in parliament and everything. Now they came into power in 2018 and they reinforced the PPP structure in the country. In the same 2018 that they took over, they established the Office of Presidential Infrastructure Initiative, the OPII. And the OPII is running concurrently with the PPP unit that was established in 2014. So they've strengthened it. And from my understanding, looking at both the PPP unit and the OPII, it seems as if the OPII gives the go-ahead for all PPP projects. They have their own staff, and the PPP unit too has its own staff. So what we have is an entrenchment of the PPP model as the model of development.
It really kind of gives a sense of when that is the context, this global model and process just kind of swoops in and really embeds itself. In so many ways, Sierra Leone seems to have been almost like the perfect country in terms of implementing this neoliberal strategy. And I think it's a very profound reflection in just showing the power of these global models and processes and how they move into a country and embed themselves deeply into the system.
Yeah, thanks, Hussainatu. You mentioned in your reflection just now the case of Addax. The case study focused on the development of this mega project that was linked both to the agriculture and the energy sectors, the Addax Bioenergy Sierra Leone. Can you very briefly tell us the summary of the full story of this case and what are the main insights from the study? And also what's the current status of the process?
Okay, the entire Addax Sierra Leone project is a farce. It brought to the fore the flaws in the PPP development model because there were 6 international development agencies funding the project. The main project funder or initiator was the Addax Oryx group in Switzerland, and they developed the project in Sierra Leone. What I learned, the former president, it was in his constituency, his hometown, Makeni, that most of it took place. It was told to people that, look, it's going to be the largest PPP agricultural development project in Africa, blah, 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 blah. And all these development agencies came on board. The African Development Bank was very central and did most of the feasibility studies for the project. Unfortunately, after 2 years, the project closed. And lack of transparency and accountability is actually run around across the project. For instance, the communities were not told anything. They were not given any heads up, but the development finance institutions, they all got their monies back and left the people hanging with nothing. Their lands were taken. They could not even go back to their lands because it was a 50-year lease. And this was just after 2 years. And all the development projects they promised the people did not even materialize. So these people became poorer than they were when the project started. And for me, it was very painful going through it and reading and talking to people because I have done work for the ADB. I was shocked to learn that the ADB was part of this project. And most of what the ADB has written was not reflected in what happened in Makeni, the Addax project. So I was appalled that the ADB can be part of this project and just took whatever belonged to it and left. In the various places in Africa, people look up to the African Development Bank. The World Bank is big in our countries, but most people in Africa look up to the ADB. Oh, the ADB is bringing a project. Oh, the ADB is going to do this. Oh, the ADB is going to do that. And for the ADB to have just joined the others and left like that was very disappointing. After that, ABSL, as Addax, changed ownership and it's started operating as Sunbird in 2016. From studies that international NGOs and another local NGO, I've forgotten the name, all the work they've been doing showed that Sunbird didn't have the financial capacity to continue with the project. It was all a shadowy deal, and they brought Sunbird into the mix of things. By 2019, Sunbird was also reselling the project again to this time a Sri Lankan group. So it's just been very sad that this has happened and the people are poorer than expected. They cannot go back to their land because of the 50-year lease. So they've really not gained anything. And what you just say is just the pauperization of the worker, of the people. That is what it's the reality.
Such a clear summary of what seems to be very weak governance of the overall project, both by the role of an international finance institution, the African Development Bank, and by the government. And I think we see it especially when the whole project started. Again, it was a, quote, perfect model because the company met its international sustainability qualifications and certification requirements. But we see that even in the initial implementation, and especially in the subsequent sale of the company, that these requirements weren't applied at all. And it's really been to the detriment of the people and the communities and the environment. So I wonder, given this story, And I think especially of the role of the international institutions that really were more interested, it seems, in getting their investment out. Could you reflect on the implications for national sovereignty and the capacity to hold companies accountable and to address urgent development priorities?
Very good question. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news or to be extremely pessimistic. But from the Addax situation and other large-scale agribusiness development programs across the country, there is not much the state is doing. Although with one of the companies, Scofin, that operates in Pujon, I guess, with the help of various NGOs, they've been able to get to the Human Rights Commission to try to renegotiate the contract so that the people in the area can have a better deal. But it's taking longer than necessary. And even then, people are still complaining. The lawyers for the communities are complaining that at every juncture, they change some of the demands. A state just coming out of war and you are faced with the destruction of practically all your infrastructure facilities. It becomes a problem. How do you negotiate? And as we all know, the international financial institutions don't have patience. Just recently, 2 bills that from newspaper reports has been hailed as people-friendly, women-friendly, and environmentally friendly. Scofin, one of the largest agribusiness outfits in the country, their director is saying it is just a dream. So we don't know at the end of the day if it is actually just going to be a dream. The other agribusiness, mining businesses, we don't know what they might come up with because the bill has been approved by Parliament. So it's actually very difficult for there to be a change. That's one progress we can say. But again, things might stall with implementation. Well, let's wait and see.
Thanks very much. And that's very encouraging to hear. And I think it also makes me think and realize how it takes time to build that foundation of systems and architecture and everything before sustained development can move forward. And I know you were reflecting earlier that the whole PPP modality seemed to have been pushed too soon onto the country. There was one other image that came out of your case study, and I just wondered if you could reflect on that. And that's around the environment, because really the whole project was portrayed as addressing the climate crisis. But instead, you've documented so well the deterioration in the local environment, especially the land and the water. And we learned that there's been actually a contribution to greenhouse gases through women now having to produce and sell charcoal for their livelihoods. And I wondered if you had any reflections on the contradictions around the climate narrative. For example, are climate and environmental issues really just a type of greenwashing in this kind of a project?
Yes, in all of the projects, that's what happens. Because when you read their project documents, it is very solid. They will talk of how they are going to protect the environment, what they're going to do, paint a very grandiose picture of what the future would look like. But when it comes to implementation, they start cutting corners. And with Addax, people could no longer buy fish because the water is polluted. Farming activities reduced because of pollution, which also destroyed the water resources. Because of all of this, women without farmlands anymore resorted to cutting down trees and burning charcoals to earn a living. And of course, we all know charcoal production actually harms the environment. So we need a very strong environmental monitoring systems. Most of the technical expertise, Sierra Leoneans, most of them are abroad in Europe and America or in some other African countries like South Africa. They are not there to do the implementation. Or when they are there, when one regime finishes its tenure, another comes in, there's a change, people just go, political appointees. the director of the environmental agency. She's a technical person. I went to school with her, but they said it was a political appointment. She left. I haven't followed up to know if the person who took over is just as qualified as she is.
It certainly underlines what we read about the case, that the environmental element was really to address the needs for biofuels in the European market and not really focused on the environmental needs of Sierra Leone. No, thanks so much.
Thanks, Hussainatu. It's so interesting how you are framing it and how the many issues interconnect, also power relations between countries, and how difficult it is for countries like Sierra Leone to really implement this environmental approach due to lack of professional capacity, but also because to push for environmental standards many times conflict with economic interests. So we ended up with this kind of greenwashing coming from donors, and you were very clear telling us how at the end the implementation of this project ended up making people more poor. And it's clear from the case how women especially were affected. And this may appear as a contradiction because the World Bank and other international financial institutions that push for this kind of project have mainstream gender equity strategies, and they proclaim that their approach will help women. But when we see what happened to the communities, it is clear that that's not what's happening. So in this case, it even seems that those gender mainstreaming criteria, like hiring a quota of women workers, were not really applied. So if you can tell us a little bit more about what this case say about the international organization's gender mainstreaming narrative and how it is applied in a specific case like this one, and what are the risks of this kind of approach?
I can talk of the ADB because I've done quite a few assignments for them. And the ADB since the 1980s has been in the forefront of promoting gender equality and gender mainstreaming in development. Just recently, they adopted the bank's gender strategy for 2021 to 2025. And usually in their projects, they have a minimum of 30% employment quota or participation quota for women and youth. 30% for women, at times 25%, 30% for youth. In the case of Addax, there was no quota as to how many women would be employed. And I was not even able to access anything showing that payments, whether there were benefits that these workers get and whether the benefits were gender sensitive. They'll say they will give women housing. No, a woman, you are not the head of the household, so you cannot get housing. But we don't know if the husband is working where he has social facilities to access through his workplace. So there was nothing in the offering for them. So for me, that's a disappointment. That's a big X for the ADB.
And I think what's come out so strongly is really the contradiction between global and national policies, structures, and the reality on the ground. We learned about how the workers went on strike against these atrocious conditions that you've described, and how communities were able to renegotiate some of the land use after the project started. What about local government? Was there any effective decentralization in supporting a real community, locally based resistance?
No. Unfortunately, no. The local government negotiated with the paramount chiefs. In the case of my study, Addax Bioenergy Sierra Leone Limited, ABSL. ABSL just negotiated with the central government through the president that was the main flag bearer of the project because it was in his constituency or his hometown. It was only when they realized through Namati and Slinov, people started organizing and agitating to say, look, you promised us this, we didn't get this, and why should you take our land for so long? They were able to resist, organize strikes. They don't want any negative press, but they were not willing to negotiate. And even with the changing of the ownership, temporary workers were dismissed quickly, and it came to the permanent staff. What they gave to them as compensation wasn't enough. They even went to the Ministry of Labor. The Ministry of Labor, unfortunately, sided with the owners. But right now, I can only say that the situation is very grave because they don't have access to their land. They don't have work. How are they surviving?
That also explains why there's just the eruption of demonstrations that we saw happen in August.
Were it not for the feminist groups that engaged with FAO through UN Women, and they first of all did the new land law. So it was with that they were able to insert clause for women's land ownership that has resulted in these customary land bills and the two new bills that were just adopted in August. So it is actually with the women's movement's participation through FAO, because FAO was the lead. I think FAO and World Bank and UN Women were the lead in the formation of the land bill. These two bills, the Customary Land Act and the Land Commission Act, they are going to empower local landowners to negotiate the value of their land with investors and prevent the leasing of their land without express consent. Hopefully, we expect that this would happen and we'll have a new architecture surrounding land. But we'll have to see how it is going to be implemented. One thing that gives me hope, the gender empowerment bill was submitted to Parliament, and it was promised that they would enact it before the end of the parliamentary session. If this bill is enacted, it includes 30% reserved seats for women, 30% appointive positions for women, access to finance for women, and gender mainstreaming and budgeting. These are the four main points of the bill. Hopefully, if it is passed and implemented, we'll start seeing improvement in the status of women in terms of ownership, in terms of political participation. These new bills are the building blocks for women's empowerment and emancipation in Sierra Leone.
Thanks, Hussainatu, and it's wonderful that you bring this light of hope in your last comment, because we are coming to the end of this conversation, and we really wanted to end with a hopeful note. So what gives you hope that in Sierra Leone and more broadly in the Global South, we will really be able to challenge the neoliberal model and to start building different systems for better lives in our country?
Well, primarily, I think if we can have an educational system that will teach different models of development, if we can have the technical expertise back in the countries to engage, to say this is really what we want. The PPP is not the model for us. Yes, we need infrastructure. We need water. We need electricity. We need good roads. We need internet connectivity. But how do we get these things? Yes, the NGOs do a lot of activism, engage a lot. But if you don't have the people in the university to teach the new crop of people to know what to do, how to engage, that you use our own local consultants. Instead of bringing consultants from Europe, America, and pay them such huge money. Let us use our own consultants. So what we need is democratic participation and democratic governance. What we have now is neocolonialism, where they come with their technical expertise to ensure we do what they want. What futures are we leaving for our children and grandchildren? It's good to look on the bright side. Maybe we'll get something good to happen.
Thanks so much, Hussaina. Let's hope that the bright side will win.
This podcast series was produced by Dawn, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. Today's episode was edited by Alice Furtado and engineered by Ernesto Sena. Thank you for joining us. If you would like to learn more about Dawn's work on public-private partnerships, visit our website at www.dawnnet.org. I am Masaya Llavaneras Blanco. See you on the next episode.